Welcome back to Newsday. Thank you for staying with us. Now, last week, hundreds of people took to the streets of South Africa's financial capital, Johannesburg, to protest a prolonged energy crisis which has caused record power cuts in the country. The demonstrators gathered in the center of the city from where they marched to the headquarters of the ruling African National Congress. Now, most of them were dressed in blue, the color of the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, which organized the rally. Scheduled blackouts, known as load shedding, have burdened South Africa for years, with state-owned energy firm Eskom failing to keep pace with demand and maintain its aging coal power infrastructure. But the outages have reached new extremes over the past 12 months, with lights going off several times a day, sometimes for up to 12 hours.
We are here to defend our revolutionary house. If they want, they must not take the struggles of the people of South Africa. Everyone is here is challenged by the same crisis.
Load shedding is now costing the country 4 billion rand a day. More people go into unemployment, more poverty. The ANC is the cause of the poverty and the load shedding.
We're just really tired, of going through load shedding day after day, and we want to see that action is taken. I believe there's a lot of promises, there's a lot of things that people bring within government, but we don't see realistic action being taken place. And I think today it's just a form of telling the people and in government that, listen, we want to see change.
I really hope that the message across the country today is that this price increase is unacceptable, unaffordable, unfair, that it should be seriously reconsidered and actually rejected, and that the government's got to get its head out the sand and start properly dealing with the energy crisis.
Meanwhile, South Africa's governing ANC party has asked top officials to declare a national state of disaster to end the worsening electricity blackouts. Arise South Africa correspondent Mxolisi Masango joins us now. Mxolisi, thank you for joining us on Newsday. And just to make matters a bit light, it's actually wonderful that you can join us in the midst of this power situation. But I'd like to start by asking why there's been a degree of hesitation by the President Ramaphosa's administration when it comes to declaring a national disaster, which would actually unlock additional funds and resources to better manage this crisis.
Look, it's actually not that simple to just declare a state of disaster. One would assume for any other country or state for whatever reason or so, because so many things would really have to make, you make sure that they take the checks and balances. Now, the back of this whole crisis that is happening right now is, mostly the procurement processes that most analysts have said that if Ramaphosa is speedy to declare this state of disaster, we would see then procurement processes really being eased up to ensure that we have more independent power producers that would come and supply power just to ease the burden on South Africans. So the fear now is that there would be another round, as we've seen when a state of disaster was declared on the COVID-19 pandemic, of widespread looting of government coffers here, as we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So most analysts have been saying that the country would really have to tread with caution, especially when it comes to declaring the state of disaster, because it would really open the doors for more corruption. It would really open the doors for the state coffers being looted, all in the name of this being a state of disaster. So conversations in the country now are carefully being had around declaring this energy crisis a state of disaster, because one, this will also mean that government will have to play ball and also engage the various stakeholders as well as the independent power producers who would be willing to lend a hand, and bring in some alternatives of power that, there could be solar in the form of solar. Yesterday, I had a conversation with one independent power producer who said that the energy crisis here in South Africa stems from maladministration in the power utility Eskom. It spans from the time that Jacob Zuma was still at the helm of the country, which saw most officials who were aligned to him benefiting through state contracts and other contracts that were allocated to ensure that South Africans had a sustainable power supply. As we speak now, as we have this conversation, I had to move to the car to have this conversation because purely there's no network and there's no power in my house right now, simply because there is just a power crisis here in the country. So right now, these power generating stations in the country are also faulty, where hour after hour, most of them have to be maintained. And this is also at a big cost to government. So it remains to be seen what the next few days will be looking like for South Africans.
Well, Mxolisi, thank you so much for your resilience in bringing us this story, even though you have to do it from your car. But let's look at, something you've pointed out, which is the root, the foundation of this issue. Secretary General of the ANC and, of course, Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, has categorically stated that the ANC has always had an energy crisis security plan, but it was all interrupted by state capture, which speaks to what you're saying, that people are pointing fingers towards President Jacob Zuma. However, there are so many different schools of thought. Other people say that this is from apartheid era and the way Eskom was run in that time. And the ANC in their National Executive Committee, Lekotla, pointed out vandalism, unpaid debts. Now, we know Eskom has been one of the biggest burdens to the South African economy for a very long time. But are we going to see a situation where, because we already have opposition, the DA protesting, Julius Malema's EFF are calling for a national shutdown, are we going to see a situation where we're going to see the ruling party, the ANC, pointing fingers and blame this entire situation on Jacob Zuma?
I'm going to tread carefully, especially when it comes to really comparing the dark past that the country comes from in apartheid and the present. I'm going to tread carefully against it, but also now conversations in the country around maladministration, as I've earlier pointed out as well. And on the other hand, you also have a government that is failing to take accountability for failures within its own procurement policies, for failures in leadership itself. The ANC, as you've also mentioned, that Lekotla that was happening, President Cyril Ramaphosa came out to say that they will make fixing Eskom, the power utility, one of their big priorities to ensure that they get it back to its former glory. But this is not possible. This is really a mission that would be in the distant future right now, seeing that most of those power stations that are tasked with, providing South Africans with a sustainable power supply are the ones that are currently in shambles as we have this conversation right now. The delivery of coal, it's quite bizarre to hear some of the excuses that South Africans are getting as to why we're experiencing this power crisis. Some of the excuses were in the form of being told that some of the power stations had wet coal. And this is at a time where this is, you have power stations that have measures in place to ensure that the systems are running smoothly, even due to rain and things like that. So right now, it is the blame game that is being played here in the country when you have one political party trying to politic also around this national crisis that South Africans are currently facing now. I can tell you one thing for sure right now is that most South Africans are fed up of this crisis, and most of them saying that they will voice out their frustrations come next year's national elections, which will be very important in determining whether the African National Congress will still be the ruling party after that. Most South Africans are saying they will voice out their frustrations on the ballot next year in that hotly contested national election.
Well, thank you, Mxolisi. Now, when it comes to assessment of the consequences based on this power situation, it's been categorized basically under three. Let me just say under 3 points. The first is further damage to the dilapidated water infrastructure. Second is slowed and cut off water distribution. And the third is affected reticulation structure due to non-maintenance of sewage pump stations. Is that a fair assessment, or is there actually more than what's been outlined?
As a journalist as well on the ground, I've engaged in several conversations with some energy analysts who've come out on many occasions to say that they feel that this is just government trying to downplay this matter. This is just a government trying to shift the buck, seeing that also now the chief executive officer of Eskom, Andre Dureta, was pushed out of the utility purely because he could not get a grip on this energy crisis here that we're facing in the country. So maladministration has, of course, been flagged as one of the issues why South Africa is currently in a power crisis right now. And why were those generating units also not maintained by the utility? Because many, many years ago, we've seen that Eskom would always have its pulse in ensuring that most of their generating units, first of all, have capacity, but also are maintained regularly. So now we are seeing these issues come up to say that these are some of the causes, of course, just pointing to why South Africans are experiencing these power outages at the moment. I think quite poignant and quite significant to this conversation we're having right now was listening to one analyst who said to me that these issues are so deep-rooted that it would have to really take a great government that is willing to first take accountability for its failures, and then they would only be able to start then to clean up efforts to ensure that they get Eskom as the power utility back to its former glory and have South Africans have the lights that they deserve.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you mentioned Andre de Ruyter because, we just look at the revolving door of management at Eskom, 13 CEOs in a decade. And it's come to be the job that nobody wants to be the CEO of Eskom, with one former CEO even calling it a poisoned chalice, I believe. Now, most of the resignations are based on in the interest of good governance, and the others are suspended because of corruption. Is it time for Eskom to go private? Is it time for us to pursue and pressure unbundling, as was the conversation when Cyril Ramaphosa first became president a few years ago?
Look, that's definitely a hot seat, as you've mentioned. It's a revolving door position, and most people find it very hard to handle that position. First of all, there's always been conversations around how certain management positions are occupied there. Some of them even went as far as saying that, it's just usually political deployments that open way for incompetency. And that is also one position that has been tipped to be at the helm of the power utility as one of those positions that are quite toxic there. So conversations are really being had around privatization. However, government is really treading very carefully around those conversations because there are so many issues that can come to play here and so many aspects that will also need to be considered. And also they would have to be mindful of the implications of privatizing the power utility. And this is also at the back of a dwindling economy here in the country. So those are some of the conversations that would have to be had around that. Whether or not South Africa will be able to see the solutions that President Cyril Ramaphosa was talking about in the form of independent power producers, because in the statement he said that it's only in 18 to 24 months that South Africans will be able to see some fruits, not all, but some fruits of the conversations that are being had right now about bringing independent power producers into the mix. It only remains to be seen.
Well, Arise News analyst Mxolisi Masango, live from South Africa. Thank you for making the effort to be here in spite of the situation, and we appreciate you and your analysis as always.